Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 3 of season 2. So I kind of dropped the ball last year by not having a single flower grower on the show. My bad. But I am excited to remedy that this year with a grower or two, starting with the wonderful Denise and Tony Gaetz of Bear Mountain Farm in Oregon. And I'm excited about this show for a lot of reasons, but one, Tony and Denise are amazing folks, full of great information on the flower business, on wholesale for flowers, which we really dive into, and you can glean a lot of no-till gardening technique from them in general. And also, Hannah and I hope to grow more flowers on our farm next year, and honestly, I think flowers can be a great option for any market gardener, so this is just genuinely and admittedly somewhat selfishly the conversation I wanted to have to help me understand flower production a little more, especially in a kind of no-till context. And the different techniques and varieties and all the stuff involved in it. Is there a radish or arugula version of flower? Something fast and profitable? We talk about that too. Before we dive into the episode, if you appreciate the work we do here with the podcast or at notillgrowers.com or our YouTube videos, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/farmerjesse. Essentially, Patreon is just a site that people can go to support their favorite content creators or artists or nerdy podcasters, and that site is the main funder of this show. It's the lifeblood. I literally could not do this show without it, and I don't even draw a salary from that Patreon page. That's real. It buys the equipment we need, it affords me to pay some folks for their help, it buys the software I use, pays all the monthly fees for the site and all the things. I started this podcast with no capital, zero. You'd think I would have learned something from trying to start a farm that way. But anyway, I started this podcast with no capital, and we're just now kind of catching up. So that Patreon page helps us to do that. And because of the amount of stuff we're doing and we're going to be doing, it's just expensive. But the whole goal is to add value to this space. I'm a full-time farmer. I need this information. And I know how hard it's been to find any of this information on no-till growing. So it is from that perspective that I do this show. So we're trying to make more info available, and we hope you'll chip in and help us do that. And at certain levels, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs to Dawson Mahalko, Tiffany Jackson, J.M. Fortier, Yannick LaPlante, Ryan Gosser, Kyle Platt, Cindy Sherman, Mike Tholis, Joshua Pearl, Josh Plymell, Jen Lawrence, Leslie Heck Dennis, Farmer Meg, Patricia Nold, Patricia Jones, Carolyn Go, Christine Albrecht, Allison Louiselle, Lindsay Rojas, Jamie Davis, Oscar and the fam over at Microleton Farms, and Sam Ritter. Thank you all, and thank you to all the patrons. Truly, truly appreciate any amount you're able to donate. Just think of it like buying the show a beer every month. Anyway, there are some perks over there too, so go check it out. Patreon.com/FarmerJesse. That's PatreonJesse. All right, enough from me. Let's get to our show with Denise and Tony Gaetz of Bear Mountain Farm. All right, Denise and Tony Gaetz, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to have you all on. I love the YouTube videos, but I must also say that you are my first flower farmers, and I'm pretty excited to get the flower rundown. So maybe we could just have you tell us a little bit about Bear Mountain Farm. Where are you? What kind of acreage, the amount of acreage you have in cultivation and those sorts of things?
Well, we're located in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, which is about 60 miles from the Pacific coast. And our growing zone, I guess, would be about 8A or 8B, depending on, which one you're talking to sometimes. And we don't get terribly cold winters, and we really don't get terribly hot summers either. So we kind of have a pretty long growing season. And the size of our farm, our overall acreage is 10 acres, but we only farm right around a quarter acre in the field, and then we have about 2,500 feet under caterpillar-style tunnels. And our season starts it can start, depending on how the climate's going for the winter, as early as mid-January, and will go typically till right around Thanksgiving. So we get a pretty good long season on the flower side of things.
Wow, that is a long season. I guess I'm a little bit surprised that it goes for that long from January. But you said your winters aren't that cold, so there's a fair amount of flower production in January. Are you selling flowers at that time, or are you more or less just starting the garden at that time?
Well, actually, we are selling anemones, which are early spring bulbs, and that's the first for us. It starts out. It can, like I said, it can start out as early as mid-January. Sometimes it depends. If we go into a long cold snap, we could be as late as early February, first week. But so it's somewhere in there between that period of time. We usually hit Valentine's Day most of the time, with good amount of flowers to sell. Go ahead.
Those
Sorry.
flowers are grown in a hoop house, though, an unheated hoop house, and we use frost blankets for protection when lower nighttime temperatures come on. But they're a very hardy spring bulb that can take some real cold weather.
Oh, nice. Okay, so I'm imagining that your Valentine's and Mother's Day. I know Mother's Day is a big flower holiday here for the flower growers, but most of them can't do much around Valentine's Day. So those are probably two of your biggest. Would those be your biggest holidays?
They kind of run from Valentine's Day to Easter, and then Mother's Day, and our last one, big holiday for flowers, surprisingly, is Memorial Day.
Oh, okay.
So if you can grow really well from 1st of January to like 4th of July, so you're hitting all the major flower holidays.
Yeah, that's great. So, and you will have to forgive me throughout this conversation for knowing so little about flowers, but I'm excited to chat with you because I want to know more. So, but maybe we could just give us a little bit of a background on did you all start in agriculture? How did you come to agriculture? Or did you grow up in agriculture? How did that come about?
Well, in my situation, the family background was typical suburban kid growing up in suburbia. My dad was worked for the Department of the Army and was in the Army for a number of years. So I moved around a lot when I was a kid. And basically, I didn't really get exposed to agriculture in college until college. And actually, my background was in forestry, not really, ag in the traditional sense. And then after that, my major was business. And so after that, actually, I went into manufacturing for about 20 years. I worked for a manufacturing company. And when that business closed in the early aughts due to basically Chinese competition, that's kind of when, I kind of got to a point in life. I was in my early 40s and decided to make a change. And that's how I came to it. And I'll let Denise talk to her side of it.
My family has been farmers. My father was in the grain business. My mother's family had a farm in the Palouse Hills of Washington State. And so there's been sort of farming in my background. My folks at one point owned a very large ranch in Montana also. I was interested in horticulture when I got to college, but I eventually then switched majors into education and graduated and became a school teacher for a few years. And then we bought this farm, and I began to do what I loved, growing flowers and landscaping and growing a vegetable garden and whatnot. And then in about 2003, when Tony's job went to China and another friend and I had been farming or growing flowers, we decided that we would start to grow to sell at the farmer's market. And that was sort of the start of the flower business for us.
Nice. Were flowers a specific choice Where did the kind of flowers come into it?
Well, that's kind of where both of us, the gal that I was kind of in partnership with, that's kind of where our major love was. We both had vegetable gardens, but when we looked at the farmers market, there were a whole lot of really awesome vegetable growers and stuff, and there wasn't anybody really selling flowers. And she had the most excellent roses, and they were just prolific. And so we decided that, why don't we do something different? So we started to sell flowers in bouquets, and that just kind of took off. And so that was sort of our choice, is we were hoping that we were going to fill a niche in our little farmer's market.
Okay, and I'd like to go down that road a little bit. How did that go when you first started selling flowers at the farmer's market like that?
It was a lot of fun. Our market wasn't. It was a good-sized market for a small, town that we were selling in, but there was about 60 to 65 vendors. In the first few years, it was really great. There wasn't hardly any competition, but as we progressed through the years, the competition kept coming in. There would be more and more flower growers, and it was really competitive and challenging. If we always kind of described it as the pie was so big, and there were more and more of us growing flowers, the slices, the pieces of pie just were getting a little bit smaller and smaller. And at one point, we were just doing really well, and suddenly we had some florists stopping by at our market booth and just saying, I want to get these flowers, and we started to look at that as an alternative. Maybe that's where we need to go, and that's kind of the direction we moved away from the farmer's market. We were there, 5 years?
God. No.
No,
Farmers market,
it's longer than that.
Yeah, it was 10 years. And every Saturday, and the market went 32 weeks for the year, and we'd go through the whole thing, because part of it was seniority based. So in order to keep your spot where you were vending and all that kind of stuff, the more times you showed up and vended, the more credit you got towards your seniority. So that was always, it was kind of important for us to make certain that we go through the entire season as far as we can. And it was a challenge, especially, you have to get up. Well, if everybody who does farmers markets knows this, you spend a good chunk of your Friday getting all ready for your 4:30 in the morning excursion to get everything lined up and set up and travel, etc., to the market. At least, from our perspective, our market wasn't that far away. It was only about 30 miles away. So, and we sold in that one, and then we also sold in a winter market there too. We did that for about 5-6 years.
Oh.
Yeah, at least 5 years.
Yeah, I think so.
And
that's
so,
great.
Yeah, it was kind of a challenging time. Basically, the changeover for us started happening about 6 years ago. That's kind of when we moved away from the farmers market. Our last year at selling in the summer farmers market, there were up to at peak 13 flower vendors out of 60 something total vendors in the market. I mean, it was just brutal.
Wow, that is brutal. And so when you made that leap to wholesale, were you able to keep your profitability at relatively the same? Or how did that affect your ability to earn? Was it relieving?
Actually, it was pretty much almost a straight trade across, because one of the things, when we were selling direct to florists, so it was by order. So they would order, and we could match up better with less cullage. In a farmer's market, you go in there and, you bring in X number of, you'd have to bring in, so many thousands of stems basically to make a nice full looking booth. And there'd always only be a percentage of it that would always come back and end up in the compost pile, because you can't, go put it in the freezer or something like that, And so, I mean, their losses were a lot less by selling to a florist. So actually, and the prices weren't terribly bad from a florist standpoint. So the transition over actually was pretty easy. And then we also got the benefit of not having to wake up at 4:30 in the morning on Saturdays. But the other thing about it too is you could more closely match up when things were coming on, instead of having this one channel, on a Saturday where, okay, well, everything's got to flow through that. We now could make multiple deliveries to different florists at different times of the week. So as things were coming on, it was a better flow. It just actually worked out much better.
Okay, so I want to get into your sort of management practices in terms of your soil, but I'm really curious about how this wholesale with flowers works. Is it something where you all are contracted for a certain number of flowers, or are you pitching them with what you have now and then they're just saying yes or no?
Yeah, basically, well, we have an availability list every week, and we contact our core customers, who we're selling to. And we say, okay, we have so many sunflowers, so many zinnias, so many whatever available. And, what would you take? And they go, well, I'll take it all, that you're offering me, or I'll take this amount and that amount. And so we end up with kind of a pick list in a sense. And with experience over time, we're able to kind of say, well, we know that in a year, we're not going to move, so many extra stems of foxglove as an example or something. But we know that as scented geranium is a green, these people buy it all day long. So we can better idea of matching. It's almost, I know Ben Hartman uses this term pull, but it's kind of almost somewhat of a pull system.
It's kind of also, too, is that I market the flowers mostly, and I spend a lot of time developing a relationship with the designers and florists that we sell to. I am constantly asking them, what is it that you would like that you aren't getting? What could we fill that you are not, able to get that's local? And I spend a lot of time in that kind of conversation, so I kind of know what each of my designers and florists like, the colors they like, the colors they're not so into, the type of flowers they like. We've worked really hard to get almost so that it's like we are growing for specific. We haven't got a contract or anything like that going, but it's like I know what they want, or what they might want, and I look for things that are new and different, and we try things out with them, and they give me a yay or a nay on that, and it's just over time, it's almost like we've specialized for each customer, and growing exactly those kind of things that they want to get on a weekly or a seasonal basis.
So are your top sellers to wholesalers roughly the same kinds of flowers that you were selling, were your top sellers at market?
No.
No, not really.
Huh.
Yeah, because at the market we were growing to bouquets,
yes, that's true.
At that time too, we did a lot of dahlias and lilies, and we've kind of moved away from that because of for dahlias, for us where we grow, I don't know if you know you probably heard of the spotted cucumber beetle. That Brodica beetle is really bad in our area, and unless you're using a lot of chemicals like orthene or something like that, we can't grow them effectively, which is interesting because people could be 20 miles away from it. There's a lot of flower farms around us in the valley that grow excellent dahlias, and they have They grow them organically, and they have no problems. But like we're right around grass seed fields where they raise grass seed for pasture, forage, and stuff like that. And that is a monoculture type system in which the grub phase of the Dibrotica beetle feeds on the roots of a lot of these pasture grasses. And when they harvest, it's like they molt into their adult form and they just flow in on the wind. It's been really a challenge for us. And in that case, we had to drop dahlias. And then lilies, as an example on that one, the market just changed. People used to love lilies, and then they kind of fell out of favor. So that's kind of interesting. Even when we're selling to the florist itself, over time, these things just kind of morph. Like, as an example, gladiolas were viewed as funeral flower. And designers wanted to stay away from glads. Now they're kind of getting interested in them again because
it's the same thing with like carnations. The standard carnation you find in the grocery store isn't popular, but there's antique-y looking, very specialized looking carnations now, and they're becoming very popular. So, we kind of roll with what's trending, but there's certain standard things that we continue to grow that are, that all bouquets need, all florists need, that lots of greens. Everything they make usually starts with a greenery of some kind.
Interesting. So when you said that you aren't doing as many bouquets, so that means you're also not growing a lot more stuff that just kind of fills it out, or you're still growing those things? Like, what's the difference between, I understand that you're probably like cutting 25 or 50 zinnias or whatever they need, but then also when you're making bouquets, are you growing like ornamental grasses and that sort of stuff as well?
Well, we grow things, now in straight bunches, but over time we know that things that make a bouquet filler, so to speak, they not necessarily do they want lots of that. They can get that kind of stuff fairly cheap. What they're looking for is kind of specialty things. And although we had some of that at the farmers market when we started, we've gotten more specialized in it that are things that are a little trickier to grow, like ranunculus and anemones and old-fashioned heirloom mums that come at the end of the season. They're not the typical mums that you can find at a wholesaler. These are real old-fashioned, big, poofy, with really incredible colors and, fallish colors and stuff. Those are the kind of things that they're looking for, not so much things like baby's breath. And, we do have different kinds of things, though, that we try every once in a while. We do grow snowberries and hypericums because those are kind of unique things that add, as my designers and florists say, they add sparkle to whatever they're making. But yeah, we're not trying so hard to grow everything that they need to make whatever they're making. We're just trying to give them the things that they can't get, or that they can get, but they say ours are better, and get them those specific things. Like the example, I have one gal just loves sunflowers and wants sunflowers on a weekly basis, and there's lots of people that are growing sunflowers, but for some reason she likes the size and the color and the shape that our sunflowers that we provide. It's just what we're doing that's different, I guess. And I don't know how much different, but that makes ours just a little more unique.
Yeah, that's
the other thing too that we noticed about florists is, part of the deal is when somebody goes into a florist and buys something, they're spending a little more time than if they're buying a grab-and-go bouquet at a farmer's market or something like that. And I heard this once on one of a podcasts from Chris Blanchard, and I can't remember the gentleman who said it, but he said something about that that the expectation at a farmer's market was basically, or a wholesaler, was the definition of quality was a heavy box and a low price. And it's somewhat that kind of thing kind of fit what was going on at the farmer's market, is that people were looking at something that would last a day. You know, they're going, oh, I'm going to a barbecue tonight and I just want to take some flowers, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that is a definite market niche, but it tends to move towards flowers that are more common, cheaper, from the standpoint that the value proposition is lower. But when you're selling to a designer or an event person, they're designing for a look, and that their customer is paying for a style or a look. And so there's a higher value put into what they put for their inputs and what they're willing to pay for their flowers. And so that was one aspect of why we moved away from the wholesale, or not wholesale, but the farmer's market side of things. And we did try actual real wholesale through a wholesale house or through an open like co-op market type thing. And we just, what we also realized on this too is that if you're selling in a wholesale environment, volume is important to the wholesaler, consistency of volume over, you know, a span of time. And so that really lends it to what we call row cropping. I mean, basically you're making long rows of zinnias and long rows of whatever other flowers, you know, and things of that nature, snapdragons, etc. And that tends to, you know, larger acreage. And we you know, our farm is just not set up that way. It's not something we can do. And so it's kind of like, that's almost its own niche itself too, and tends to, you know, move towards a lot of mechanization, or, you know, more further distribution away from the farm. And one of the things that we're trying to do with the farm here is sell in as local as possible, and not get into the deal of, you know, shipping our flowers, you know, 200, 300 miles away to be sold.
The other thing about it that I want to add is that quite a few of our designers and florists are looking for local, and they market their flowers as local. One of our customers deals with the university that is affiliated in the city and they like the fact that she gets her flowers from a local source, and that they kind of promote that kind of thing. And the second thing I was going to add is a lot of our designers and florists aren't looking for huge lots of anything. You know, they're not looking for like 400 sunflowers. They're looking for, oh, that is a great variety of things that you have. You have some sunflowers, you have some zinnias, you have some dianthus, you have the greenery, you have celosia. They like small lots of all these things in that, you know, they can use. And when I try and connect the dots real close with, I've got a color scheme that I'm kind of working because I pay attention to their color scheme, I can deliver a group of flowers and they can go, wow, that just all works together so well. And it's like, well, that was part of my plan. I was trying to plan it with them in mind and the things that they tell me. And so, you know, growing huge long rows of stuff just isn't, you know, like Tony says, it's not really conducive to our farm, but it's not what our customers want. They want, wow, I really like the variety that you're offering.
You know, what's striking about that is it sounds like the florists and the designers are the flower equivalent of high-end chefs for vegetable farmers. So we have, you know, we'll have like a couple chefs who will say, you know, I'll pay a little extra if you'll provide them all at the same size, or I want this specific thing. And then who also just like to be inspired by the variety.
I can see that.
Yeah, that's super. So anyway, that's neat. That's a good way for me to relate to it.
Hey, you all, just going to jump in here real quick and get a word from our amazing Season 2 sponsors like Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software makes it easier for your farm to manage working with your buyers. By lessening the administrative load and increasing efficiency, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, and work with more buyers overall. Our free account includes features to manage your real-time and coming soon product availability, and tools to create your own availability calendar to inform buyers of the seasonality of your products. The free account also includes access to the Farmers Web Guide to Working with Wholesale Buyers, which offers pro tips and best practices on how to work with restaurants, schools, and other similar buyers. A 1-month free trial is available of the paid account, which includes features to manage your customers and orders, give select buyers special pricing and payment terms, track your buyers' payments, send invoices, keep detailed sales records, and much more. You can even manage orders for buyers who don't place them online. Access a demo video and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Also, big thanks to show sponsor BCS America.
You already know about the legendary versatility of BCS two-wheel tractors on the small farm. You know it's the most economical and time-saving choice for market farmers. Building beds with the rotary plow, mixing amendments with the power harrow, and mowing cover crops with the flail mower. But a BCS two-wheel tractor can do much more beyond the small farm. BCS powers more than 40 high-quality PTO-driven attachments, each with the power and performance of an all-gear drive transmission. Blow snow with BCS's snow thrower, also known as the snow cannon. Chip and shred debris with the chipper shredder. Clean your property with the pressure washer. Irrigate your lawn or garden with the high-pressure irrigation pump. Haul over 800 pounds, including yourself, with a rideable utility trailer. And now, spread compost evenly over 30-inch beds with the all-new spreader attachment. Yep, BCS is pretty much the Swiss Army knife of power equipment. Check out bcsamerica.com for the latest attachments, videos, promotions, and more. That's bcsamerica.com.
All right, thank you so much to our sponsors. Back to the show.
I want to hear a little bit about how you all got into no-till flower farming. And did you start out as no-till, or was that something that kind of came later?
It definitely came later when we first started out. It's like we were pretty new at this, and so we approached things when we started on a very conventional way of saying, well, you know, if you're going to start growing stuff, you need to open up the land, you know. And so we first started out with a BCS tiller and, did a small areas with that. And then eventually we ended up getting a Kubota tractor with a 5-foot, tiller on the back. It felt kind of like Tim Allen and more power, And it certainly opened things up faster. But one of the things is like, it really helped in the first couple of years, but basically we didn't realize what we were doing was basically burning our biology out. And so the first probably 3 to 4 years, we had, pretty good production, and, sure, you apply some fertilizer. We weren't using 16 or anything like that. We were just basically using organic compost and tilling that sort of thing in. But we still were using some sprays, and particularly on dahlias, for cucumber beetles and other bugs that would, destroy the quality of the flower. And that whole process, I'd say, really came to a screeching halt in 2008. That year, we had a lot of problems. That they were just kind of like building on each other, but they really came to bear in terms of our fertility dropped. It just like between 2007 and 2008, it didn't matter that we put on, the same amount of compost that we had in the prior years. That's like what happened is we found it more difficult to get the tilth of the soil right. We were getting a kind of a compaction layer that was down 6 to 8 inches below the depth of the tiller would go down to that 6 to 8 inches and do a real good job on that. But then we'd run into like a compacted layer. And the other thing that we never took into account on this place, when we originally bought it, we didn't buy it as a farm to grow flowers or food other than, for our own personal thing. And so there wasn't a lot of thought at the time saying, is this prime agricultural land? And it's not. As a matter of fact, when you go look at the soil maps on it, our area is designated as not suitable for agriculture. And, so that's where we started our farm. And
so
that's
on the north side of a hill.
Yeah, on the northeast side of a hill. It's great for livestock, I think, but for actually raising plants, it was definitely, we just created our own challenges. And like I said, in 2007, 2008, that's kind of when we noticed that the, continual tillage of things was causing a lot of problems with, we were getting increased insect infestations, and it didn't matter what you sprayed. We were finding that we were using,
went down.
Our yields went way down, and it just and some parts of it. We have 3 distinct soil types on our property, and there's actually 2 distinct and 1 transition zone, but it acts as its own type. And I'd say if you wanted to classify them, it runs from soil quality from sucks to extremely sucks. It's heavy clay silt, and part of it is the worst area has a very high water table in the wintertime. And so the last year when we were tilling was the worst. We couldn't actually get into that lower area till June. And so when you're dealing with flowers, it's not like veg when you're raising radishes and lettuce and stuff like that, where you go, it's no problem. It's a 45-day cycle or something like that. You crop and you crop. Most flowers have, when you raise them, you get maybe 2 successions. And if you're really lucky, depending on what it was, you might get 3 in the same spot in the course of a season. And so, when you're already starting at can't get into an area till June, it just, really puts you behind the 8 ball. So that's when we started looking at it saying, we got to do something different. And we really weren't that aware of people like, now with YouTube and everything. There's Charles Dowding and there's NeverSink and all the big guys you've interviewed in this last year. We weren't really aware of those people at all during that period of time. If some of them hadn't even started yet. And so the only model we really had was the Rodale, no-till practices that they were working on in their experimental farm, which is basically for corn and, that sort of thing. So it's the idea of growing rye and vetch and crimping it down and then planting into it. And that was kind of our first experiment with no-till, particularly in the area where we had a very difficult time getting into it. And we had a little bit of success with that in 2009, 2010, that we've used it a number of times out in that area with a high water table, because when the cereal rye would begin to grow in the spring, it was very effective at pulling excess water out of the soil. But it really wasn't very effective for a lot of flowers that are low growing in size. I'll give you an example of something like a dianthus, which grows more like a lettuce plant, in a sense that it's pretty low growing when it starts out in life. And so when you're trying to plant through a thick residue, it was very difficult to, get that kind of stuff established. It worked real well for large things like sunflowers or zinnias or things of that nature, but for us, it was kind of that was our first experiment with it. And then we kind of stumbled upon occultation. Part of it was, we noticed that when you just basically look at something and you leave a plastic tarp over, going, hey, I killed that stuff off pretty good. It's like, duh. And so we started kind of experimenting with that, and that was kind of a few years into that. That was also when kind of like J.M. Fortier came out with his book, The Market Gardener, and we looked at that, and the stuff he was doing, going, well, wait a minute, that's a much more effective methodology with the silage tarps, and so we started kind of experimenting with that. And one of the things with us is like we're still, I'd say, kind of a bit of an experimental mode, trying to find the right tool to use at the right time. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting is people get kind of pretty dogmatic and locked into a way that's saying, well, on my farm, the only thing I do is sheet mulch with straw. Okay, there's Patrice Gross there at Foundation Farm, and he's pretty effective at that. That works in his context. But what we have kind of found is that sometimes, depending on what we're trying to grow, maybe the best methodology is using something like Charles Dowding uses, with the sheet mulch of compost, providing a much more uniform growing surface for smaller flowers. So sometimes that is more effective. And you see where we're kind of heading to is like we started kind of putting a toolbox together, I guess, is a way of saying it. And then it wasn't necessarily that we're totally locked into one specific method. And we're still evolving.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's definitely something that we've run into as well, is that certain methods work under certain circumstances on our farm, but then there are other circumstances where that same method doesn't make as much sense. So then we try and maybe it's like we're going with that deep compost mulch, and then at other times we're like, well, maybe we need some cover crops here to plant into to hold that soil in place or cool it down or whatever it may be. It's interesting to think about it as more of a toolbox method.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd give you a great example just on occultation and some differences on that. If you use a silage tarp versus, say, that polyweave geotextile landscape, fabric where everybody buys thousands of yards of this stuff and burns holes in it and plants their plants in it, right? It's also, pretty useful for occultation, because the nice thing about it in the rainy season here is the water flows through it. So it doesn't end up just pooling up, and so you actually are able to break the force of the rain coming down, but the water still absorbs into the bed. So the microbiology underneath the tarp can work on the surface residue as well as the roots and things of that nature. But if you try to use that same tarp in the summertime around here, we go through a very dry season. From about July 4th till about Labor Day, we rarely get rain. We'll go pretty dry, and the days will be in the mid 80s, and sometimes we'll go in the high 90s, and we get a lot of wind. And so it's kind of like this weird climate. It's like you're really wet from middle October to basically early May, and then it starts to transition to drier and drier, and then you're just bone dry for July and August. And so if you try to use occultation with a geotextile fabric here with us, to say I'm going to try to take a crop out, you've got to apply a lot of excess water during that process to get that surface residue to even retain enough moisture to begin to break down. Otherwise, it just dries up into straw. However, if you use a silage tarp over the top, which is non-permeable, you wet that area down before you put the silage tarp down, you get a lot more biology working. Even though it's kind of hot in that zone, you get a lot more biology working on that surface residue than we would with the geotextile fabric. So it's kind of like, it's an interesting look.
Yeah, that's cool. I feel like, I'd be interested to know if there are specific sort of no-till approaches that you're using for specific crops. I mean, you kind of touched on that a little bit, but are there some that stand out?
Yeah, I'd say, for like sunflowers as an example, since they're such fast growers, they're probably the fastest growing flower we have. We can get some good transitions or successions in during the course of the year. And so what we'll do with sunflowers is say we can come out of a cover crop in wintertime, and so we'll what we'll do is we'll throw a tarp over the top of that and knock the cover crop down, and then just plant the sunflowers directly into that. And even if the surface residue on top, it's not that big of a deal. We grow most everything we do is not direct seed. It's actually we're putting in plants, and so they already have a head start in terms of size and things of that nature. That that residue on top of the soil isn't a problem at all, and so we'll go through the season like that. And actually, with that residue being killed off on the top, most of the time that keeps weeds and stuff from being a problem. If we're doing a rotation of sunflowers later, say like we are looking at saying the last group of sunflowers for the season, we'll undersow those sunflowers at the time of planting with like a clover oat mix, something like that would grow through our winter time. And then, for the next spring, again, you would tarp it down, and you could plant not just sunflowers, but you could also plant other things into it too. That would be like stock or other types of plants that maybe get some height to them. Specifically, though, for small plants that we would use, like dianthus or even foxglove, when they're put out, we typically don't like to have a lot of residue left on the ground. And so in that case, if we've killed off a cover crop, we'll apply a compost over the top of the soil at that point before planting. And we'll put maybe about an inch down and, wet it down really good. And then we can plant into that, and that will kind of keep the slug problem, if there is any kind of slug problem, at bay, as well as the plants just seem to thrive a little better if they're not like trying to fight their way out of a heavy residue. And so, I mean, that's kind of like the extremes. And then depending on, what we're growing, we're going to kind of bounce around in between that kind of idea.
Most flower plants going in, plugs that are going in, are on the smaller side. You get sunflowers and marigolds and zinnias are all the ones that are in ornamental corn and that kind of thing. Those are all the taller ones, but a lot of them are on the smallish size when they're ready to go in, and so it's better if they don't have to fight the residue and the slugs and all that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in terms of, a couple things. I guess in terms of profitability, you said that your yields went down when you were tilling. So are your yields back up? And then the second part of that question would be, are you able to make, what kind of money per square foot are you able to sort of earn growing flowers this way?
Yeah, what we did is, I'd say to answer the first part of the question is the yields are actually better. Part of what we have actually done is shrunk in size, because what we're trying to do is the focus of our business is this is a second career, second income type thing. So we're not out trying to knock it out of the park and say I need to make $200,000 a year in my pocket, that sort of thing. Well, I didn't want to go into that, but so what we were looking at is saying, what we wanted was a business that would be sustainable and give us a reasonable contribution to our living, but at the same time to not be so dominant in your life that it takes every aspect of your life up. That was the other thing.
We pushed hard for a while, but
yeah,
we had to look at what we're doing and decide, that there are other things in life that we were missing and we needed to get more balance. And so,
yeah, when you're trying to grow all the time, it's like, eventually you get burnout,
Yeah.
I see some of the younger farmers and I go, well, okay, when you're younger, you want to take on the world, and I get that. But I also know too that, when you're only passing through the earth one day at a time. You're not going to go back and get a redo and you go, okay, now that I got this out of the way, let's go, relive my 20s again now that I'm 40. Or I'd love to relive my 40s again. That would be nice. But but you know what I'm saying is, so what we did is we tried to structure the business that would work efficiently and get to those life goals. So it was for us to make a healthy contribution and pay for at least half our living expenses, and still enable us to have time to learn things and do things, and not feel the pressure of continuous production. We didn't want to run this thing like a factory in a sense, and I guess we had the luxury of being able to do that. So from the standpoint of how do we produce, though, is we look at a metric we use to measure is dollars per square foot and revenue cents per unit time. It's the plants in the ground. So as an example, to judge and say, wow, we make a lot of money revenue-wise off of, say, something like peonies, because they go, well, they're selling for $2 a stem, and and I get a lot of money off a plant. An individual plant might produce 15 stems, so maybe $30 a plant, or maybe even more. So I'm going to put in 500 of these plants. Well, as an example, you're only harvesting those things for 3 weeks of the year if you're lucky, and once they're done, they're done, and there is no other crop you're going to grow on that section. So even though you could look at it and say, well, in 1,000 square feet, I've got 300 peony plants, and you start doing the math and you start figuring that out, and you say, well, it's a really good dollars per square foot. Yeah, but when you divide it by, 12 months, it's maybe only $1 a square foot or $2 a square foot or something like that, as opposed to something that maybe you can multi-crop in a scenario. Getting, as an example, we raised sweet peas in our tunnel, and they were in the ground for 4 months, roughly. But at the same time, too, we harvested a crop of stalk off of the sides, because of the way you raise sweet peas up on a trellis system, and opened up a lot of underplanting, intersowing opportunity there. And so now we're going to rotate after the sweet peas. We're rotating into fall snapdragons. And so in actuality, that kind of combination in our tunnel is going to make us a lot more than the peony plants. So what the key to it, though, is you got to look at it as saying, in the per unit time that something is in the ground. If you can't move it to the next crop that gives you a next harvest, it that's kind of how we evaluate it. And so what we try to do then is look at those things that way, so that we can either intersow, interplant, and get multiple things at a simultaneous time, or at least one will be done before the next one. Crop after that one with another planting of something, and then we're just continually trying to build that dollars per square foot, and if all possible, shrink the unit time that any one particular crop that we're doing is spending there. But the key driver to it all is what the customer wants. And so peonies, we still do peonies because the customer wants them, and they actually do get a fairly good price. It's just that we know that if you really wanted to be an absolute turnover, massively try to get the dollars, out of every square foot, you probably wouldn't do peonies. It's kind of like when you look at these veg guys, they're all kind of moving towards like fast turnover. Quicker is better, because the more I turn over, And so what happens is most of these guys, they end up just morphing into salad producers. Maybe that's a bad way of saying it, but it's kind of what it looks like. I raise radishes and I raise, quick cut greens and lettuce and, but all that stuff turns fairly fast. So I can get multiple sowings in a year. But that's how you maximize your dollar per square foot if you're small.
And we try to maximize the dollars per square foot, especially in our tunnels. That's the most valuable location for our flowers. So we try and do those as well as possible. And we're looking for, $20 a square foot? Isn't that what we're shooting always for?
Yeah, not per unit time, but just on a gross, square foot basis, how much.
Where the field is not that high.
No, it's maybe $5. We target to try to get to $5 in the field per square foot.
So what is the radish and arugula version of a flower? What are the what would be that like high profit flower? What does that look like?
I'm not really sure there is one.
I'm not sure there
because
is
it kind of
either.
seems like most of the things that we have that are the quickest are about 60 days.
That's
and then depending on the weather, it can kind of lengthen that out. I mean, as an example, we had some sunflowers that we planted or sowed and started in week 20, and these things are supposed to be 60-day max. And we're just now harvesting them, so they're pushing 80 days, and that's because our nighttime temperatures in June were low, so we didn't get the heat units. And so with flowers, for us, what we have noticed is like sunflowers would be probably one of the fastest turning things that you could do.
Not necessarily the most profitable, but
No.
the most profitable are the come and cuts. When you keep coming at them and cutting them. That's why everybody grows dahlias. They just keep producing blooms. Zinnias, that same thing where it'll just keep blooming and keep blooming. If you keep them cut and they're healthy and stuff, they'll just keep coming.
The same thing with greens
are
too,
like that, and greens are like that. Your dusty millers and your scented geraniums, and even sage, and rosemary. Those kind of things that you keep cutting and they just keep coming. So it's where sunflowers one and done. You cut it, it's done. There's a lot of flowers that are one and done, but the ones that that you don't really think would be super profitable are profitable because they just keep going as long as they're healthy. You just keep cutting and cutting.
Hey, you all, just jumping in real quick to say, have you checked out our No-Till Growers events? We debated for a long time doing a sort of full-blown No-Till Growers conference, and we may still do that at some point, but we really want to bring people directly to farms. So we're trialing that a few times over the next year, and so keep an eye out on the events tab at notillgrowers.com. There's no hyphen in there, just No-Till Growers, all one word. Right now we have maybe a few tickets left for the Frith Farm event here in Kentucky at Rough Draft Farmstead. That's in October 2019. Literally a few, I think there's maybe 3 left. But we announced an event in San Diego this upcoming February 2020 with Jared Smith of Jared's Real Food and Stephen Cornett of Nature's Always Right. You should check this event out. We are really excited about what these two farms have going on. Kind of profitable permaculture stuff, some KNF. We just think there's a wide applicability to it, so we're really excited to bring people to these farms. That's it. Check those out at notillgrowers.com. Tickets are for sale right now, and there are discounts for Patreon members. Just saying. All right, back to the interview.
Can you talk a little bit about harvesting and... Well, actually, I have 2 questions here. Again, harvesting, so just general, are you putting it into a cooler, that sort of thing. And also, I know that stem life is a big deal in flowers. So has the stem life improved since you've gone, since that time around, when did you say, 2008 or so, that the tillage was kind of taking its toll? Has the stem life improved since the quality of soil has improved?
I think so.
Yeah,
but stem length
absolutely.
is not critical. The interesting thing with design work is it's always better to have a nice long stem, because they can cut it off. But I can sell even really short flowers that didn't grow as tall as I'd hoped. I can sell those all day long, because designers do lots of what they call cube work, low, things for dinner parties and stuff like that, where they don't want to be looking around the flowers. They just want the flowers there. So stem length is important, but it's not critical. I mean, longer is better because you can cut it off and you don't have to tape it on or something stupid. But I think that on a lot of our flowers, because of the way we're growing now, we are getting longer stems.
Yeah, some of the things, I mean, I think the biology of things has also changed a bit too, is that we do see less disease. And we do see, we still have the cucumber beetle issue. That's the biggest one. But a lot of the other insects and things that were maybe causing damage are drastically down. Like, we used to have a lot of slug damage. And our ground beetle population now is huge. And some of it tends to kind of keep those things in check. And we've got a lot more wildlife. I mean, the one thing that we noticed is that all the way through the food chain, the arthropods, the snakes and the things of that nature. Now, Denise hates the snake part, but to me, it's all an indicator of like there's a food web going on here, and it's working. And so we don't lose things like we used to in transplants. We'd get a lot of devastation from slugs if it was too wet. Now we don't worry about that too much, because it doesn't really happen. Sure, we still got those little gray slugs all over the place, but the population in general is significantly less. The other thing we noticed too is that it used to be the cucumber beetle population would peak in July, but just it will hang around and cause continual damage basically from that July till frost. And now they're still around, but what we're beginning to notice in the last couple of years is that once the population hits that peak, we've seen a lot more parasitic type wasps and things of that nature around that we think are having an impact on those beetles. Maybe not on the adults, but something is going after the larval stage of these things, and either in the ground with ground beetles and things of that nature, or the adults are getting picked off by something else. So we've seen, birds too. I mean, we've seen, like, in the last 2 years, where the cucumber beetle population, once it hits its peak, it literally crashes. We had 1 year where we had a planting of zinnias that the plants were skeletized. I mean, you go, well, they were lost, and I was just about, you could see through the leaves. There was nothing left except stem. Skeletized. All the green part of the leaves were skeletized out, and the veins were left. And I thought, oh, these plants are dead. There's nothing I can do about it. But we had other
things to do, so we just left them.
Yeah, just left them. And the thing is, their resilience, because I think of the fertility of the soil, and the population crashed, and those zinnias pulled out of it. And it's amazing. They actually went on and, we harvested fairly well out of them. Yeah.
We almost went to Halloween on those zinnias. They just bounced back and just were crazy with flowers and, nice long stems and, just beautiful blooms.
Some of the other things we're trying to do too to boost, we recognize that our fertility still probably isn't where it needs to be. And one of the things that we're kind of looking at is we looked at mineralizing the soil. We've been doing some work with that, the basis of getting our calcium up and kind of getting those cations balanced out. the best we can. And but the one thing that we noticed is a lot of this stuff from the biology standpoint kind of starts to take care of itself after a while. And that as the years have gone by that we've been doing this, we're actually adding lesser inputs of things, that you'd say like rock dust and things like that nature. And more just stuff to feed the biology, either the cover crops or compost, that sort of thing. Aerated compost teas, we've used those from time to time as just kind of getting some boosts. Then the other thing that I'm intrigued by is I read that article in Growing for Market about Korean natural farming. And so I started doing some research on that, and I thought, there's some interesting aspects of that I think would help take our no-till and our practices and actually kind of maybe goose them up a little bit more. And one of the things, so we started doing those solutions, making some of those things this year, and started applying them just in some test places. And we have noticed a huge difference in just insect resistance. One of the things that we were told by a friend of ours who's a biologic farmer, he raises blueberries, is part of the reason why Dibrotica beetles go after stuff is because there's an imbalance in the plant between phosphorus and potassium. I know I'm kind of getting in the weeds here. Our soils are naturally high here in potassium and low in available phosphorus. So the biology is really going to kind of work to make phosphorus available. But one of the things you can do with this Korean natural farming, is you can make your own dirt cheap water soluble calcium phosphate. Just char up some bones and set them in vinegar for a week or so, and the solution of what's left has got a fair amount of calcium and phosphorus in it. And by applying it foliar as part of a foliar feeding program to the plants, what we've noticed is we tested this like on zinnias that we applied it to on a weekly basis for a couple of weeks versus ones we didn't. And the Dibrotica beetles will land on the ones that are treated with the Korean natural farming the calcium phosphate, but they don't really feed on it much, and they kind of fly off. But the ones that weren't treated were getting their typical damage that they would get. And so it's kind of leading us to kind of do some more experiments with this stuff and say, well, tying this all together, kind of helping the plants out.
That's great. I love that you all are incorporating some Korean natural farming in there. We've done several different things, including the, collecting indigenous microorganisms and those sorts of things. And I think there's a lot of potential there for being able to generate your own fertility under your own context. And do things like natural pest management. Yeah.
Just that issue and, something, I guess the thing that kind of excites me about this is that there's always something new to learn. And just the observations of, wow, something as simple as taking the phosphorus and calcium that are in just discarded bones, from your ribs you had last night, can make a difference in your plants.
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool to hear that anecdote too, because a lot of what I find difficult about natural farming is that there are all these applications, but there are not necessarily a bunch of applications for annual gardening. So hearing those, I think, is super helpful.
Yeah, we haven't done the full range of things either. But it's something to work on for the future.
Sure. And then, so in terms of, I do want to get back to that question about harvesting. Are you harvesting out of the field and then getting those into a cooler, or does every crop require something different? How does that sort of just in a logistical?
We built had a tough shed built, and then we put a cool bot in it. So that was a game changer for us when we finally got a cooler. It allows us to harvest our flowers at when they're peak. We don't harvest too far into the future before our customer is ordered. I mean, we kind of cut to order, but on certain things that we know that can hold for a few extra days, we will harvest them at peak and put them in, water or a floral solution, and put them in our cooler to keep them for, the appropriate amount. And we don't leave anything in there for much more than max a week.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the time it's not like that at all. Most of the time the stuff's
Most
going
of it's
out within
gone.
like a couple of days.
Yeah, most of it's gone.
But it's important to use the cooler to take the field heat out of things.
Right.
Just the same as I guess it is on the veg side of things. Get them cooled down as quickly as possible.
We harvest in early morning and in the late evening, so that we can also get things moved from the field into the cooler as fast as possible.
Right. So in the middle of the day, you're definitely not harvesting hot flowers.
Most of the time, we're just watering. Watering and staying cool ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I definitely understand that. So you touched a little bit on this earlier, but is there anything that stands out in terms of no-till that you've tried that just hasn't worked, or any sort of failures in that vein? Like, I think that one thing I'd like to do more in this season of the podcast is kind of talk to people, not just about their successes, but some of the things that they've tried that didn't work, because I think those are equally as educational. Is there anything that kind of stands out in that vein?
Yeah, I think I can't say that there's anything that's an absolute total failure. Okay. I think it's more along the lines of learning what plants work well with what different systems. So as an example, the thing that was the biggest failure was trying to plant dianthus plants into our first year doing this with the roller crimped. We didn't use roller crimper. We just crimped it down ourselves. But the crimped down vetch and rye, those plants did not thrive. As a matter of fact,
the larkspur was eaten by slugs.
Then that's the other thing is what we realized is when you're using that technique, it takes time for your soil the life to balance itself out. So the first thing when you supply food for slugs, their population is going to go through the roof. And if you're not planting stuff that might be more resistant to slugs in your first year through that, you're going to lose stuff fast. We had larkspur plants that just they were gone one night, boom, and so that in a sense was a learning experience saying, well, wait a minute. Now what's interesting is when we put out, sunflowers, that really wasn't, we didn't really have much damage on those at all because they were tall enough, they were above it. The slugs didn't really go after them.
Amy and straw flowers also worked.
Yeah, Amy's or dills, those type of things worked well in it. So it kind of I think I wouldn't say that the rye vetch thing is a failure. It's more like, we had to learn the hard way of wait a minute, this stuff doesn't work with that system.
We are still experiencing problems. Thistle.
Yeah, that's another one. Perennial weeds we have knocked it down out of some areas pretty effectively, but getting rid of them in a perennial setting like in peonies or something of that nature has been very difficult. And we haven't...
And bindweed.
Bindweed is the other one. Even under a tarp, bindweed that stuff just refuses to die.
Ongoing.
So some of those perennial weeds have still been a problem, but we kind of tend to they're not a problem that's spreading in a sense, and that some of the things with like getting rid of thistle, unfortunately, I think in the perennials is just going to take heavier mulches, and so there's probably more time and more money involved in working that down, and then just being as aggressive as possible in terms of hitting those things when they sprout. With a hoe or something of that nature. It's just
we also
more
have
handwork.
grass that encroaches in some of our beds. What is that grass that you hate? That creepy one?
Oh, it's cooch grass or quack grass. That's just, that one's a pain. But actually, tarping kind of takes care of it. If you what we found is like with the edge of the tunnels and stuff like that. If we put some tarp down that's 2-3 foot wide, and just kill off a zone, and then kind of leave the edge of the that's where we tend to have the problems of this stuff creeping into our tunnels, or have had in the past. And so if we leave a permanent weed barrier down, that's at least 2 foot, that tends to keep it from coming in. So, but that was learned the hard way too.
Right. And didn't you say that you're in grass seed country? Like they're producing grass seed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So you all have like a built-in mega weed bank just kind of around you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's why a lot of people say, oh, you got to get on top of those weeds and never let them go to seed or anything like that. And it's like, well, for us, it just blows in, or the birds bring it in, And so we have a lot of these little seed-eating birds that in the fall, they're very aggressive. They're almost like little chickens, and they'll bring in, stuff that they've half-eaten and dump and scratch it into the ground for you. And it's like, here's an example. Yeah, as an example, for years, we never had any Dutch white clover on the property, but some of our larger farms neighbors decided to put that into rotation in a couple of their multi-100-acre fields. And then it wasn't a year later after they did that, we had Dutch white clover all over the place.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, it's like when you live around seed country, that's one aspect. Now, a nice thing about it is from an organic material standpoint, we can grow a pretty good hay field, and so we use a lot of that hay in our own operation just for surface mulching, things of that nature. So there's a plus there.
Yeah, that's great. I saw that video about your neighbor mowing the hay, and then you all being able to use that.
Yeah, it works out pretty good. He takes probably 2/3 of it, and we get 1/3, and so works out nice.
Denise, Tony, thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate you all sharing your knowledge, and I learned a lot about flowers today.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, we really enjoy the podcast. I've listened to your season, and it's nice to know that there's other folks out there that and hear what they're doing. So I do appreciate your work on this. I know you're a full-time farmer too, and I appreciate, you're making dedicated time to do this. I think it's great. The more we can get people to just kind of look at that, the whole thing is there's not just like this set recipe on how to do this kind of stuff, and that there's all kinds of different techniques, and I think, people just have to look at their context and, go for it.
Look around and see what other people are doing and try. We get a lot of emails and questions saying, how do you get started? Where did you find the answer? And it's like, there's no answer. Just try. Just get started and try. And if you try and it didn't work, try again and something else. So that's all we're doing. It's always an experiment. What is this thing we're going to do this week? It's always something new we're trying. The only thing I would add is that there are others in the flower industry or flower farming that are also working on this. There's a couple of gals in California that are doing some videos, and they're working really hard to be no-till also, and more and more looking at, getting started on that, maybe taking small sections of their farm and starting to do it. So the flower people are starting to look at this and starting to implement it on their farms.
Yeah, that's cool to see.
I think the other thing that people, need to kind of think about here is that when you're starting an operation, there's so much capital that, you have available to yourself. And especially if you're starting on a small basis, going out and having to buy a tractor or a BCS, a large enough BCS with all the great attachments and things of that nature is thousands of dollars. And basically it's another mouth to feed, that your farm has to feed, because you got to put gas in it, you got to put oil in it, you got to keep it fixed and all that other kind of stuff that goes with it. And the nice thing about thinking about it from this perspective is you're using biology to do a lot of that work. And that's what I think is the key to that people need to kind of get to is you don't need to go out there and beat your soil into submission. And, you are a real farmer, even though you don't have the biggest John Deere out there.
I always like to put it is let the ground peeps do the hard work for you.
The ground peeps.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, if you enjoyed that podcast, and I know you did, make sure to check out Bear Mountain Farm on Instagram and YouTube and all the places. We'll put some links in the show notes and at no-tillgrowers.com. You can also read more about them in Andrew Mefford's book, The Organic No-Till Farming Revolution. It's a great book. You must own it, especially if you're interested in this podcast at all. It's basically the book version of this podcast. He does interviews with lots of different growers, and it's great. Bear Mountain was one of his interviews, in fact, and it's great. It's great. I use the word great a lot, but it's great. The whole book. You should own it. We'll link to that. Lastly, if you really want to help keep this show going, make sure to sign up for the Patreon page. That's important, patreon.com/FarmerJesse. But also, just share the show with a friend. Share it on your Instagram stories. Share it in your favorite Facebook groups. Just share it and subscribe. You can leave a review and all those good things. That helps the show. And also just, consider becoming a patron. That is super helpful to us. Anyway, I hope you all are enjoying Season 2. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Kind of interesting. I was just looking out the window here, but, we live in grass seed country, right? And one of the things out on the flat plains is in the summertime here in the valley, you'll get these heat updrafts, which create whirlwinds.
That's devil.
So when these guys harvest their grass seed, what they do is they basically come through and they put it into a windrow, and then a combine comes through and runs it, through, and then that straw just sits out in the field. And so when these whirlwinds come through, they'll pick up tons of this straw, and they'll go hundreds of feet, if not 1,000 feet up into the air, and they'll move across the fields. And we just got hit by one. And
it's been raining
but
straw.
they dissipate, and so you just see this rain shower of straw come down.
It's been down for the last 5-10 minutes. I've been watching it.
Yeah,
too.
So we were talking about. Yeah, the reason I brought this up is because we were talking about, well, how did all those seeds, from grass seed country get on you? And it's like, well, there's an example of nature depositing it.
Yeah, literally right as we were talking about it. That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, with a mulch.
It's amazing. What's funny is I always think about, with the mulch, at least they brought you the mulch.